Are those reflections of the sun? Well, not really. They're reflections of the clouds which are reflecting the sun. But look over here. We got a window. A long window. Not very tall window. A very hazy window. From Texas to Australia. Croatia. Susanna does a lot of reposts from the morning experiences. Northern Ireland. No, from Ireland, sorry. And it's not from Northern Ireland, I think. Welcome everybody. Bethanina. Bethanina is just outside Jerusalem. I hope to be in Jerusalem for Christ the King on Sunday morning, so we'll have this, hopefully, God willing, we'll have the stroll and chat there. It's a little bit later today, so we're missing some people, I think. And that's understandable as the seasons evolve. Different kind of seasons. The time of the sun is changing, so that affects people's schedules. And then we have seasons in our life. Yesterday we were down there alongside the water. That looks like a smile, doesn't it? It's great to be able to smile even if there are thorns. Not a fake smile, a real one. And that's what we have today. In the Maccabees, the second book of Maccabees is an interesting piece of literature. It was, it's like a presentation of apparently 5 books that have been lost to culture. The books existed, and this author did his selection from these 5 books And they have been associated since the beginning of the church with, especially from the time of Origen, as 2 volumes, the first book of Maccabees and the second book of Maccabees, but they're really 2 very different pieces of 2 different works about the same thematic, about the struggle of religious freedom. And so they present many incidents. They're very important for us beyond that fact because of the developing faith in the resurrection. See, faith and revelation happens from 2 sides. Because you could tell your little doggy all about nuclear science, and you could ask your little doggy to give his opinion about nuclear science, and there might not be too much progress in nuclear science in that conversation. But then you could tell a child in kindergarten about nuclear science, or you could have a conversation with Heisenberg or Einstein when they were alive about nuclear science, and you'd have a very different conversation. Because it's not enough for one side to be able to understand things and present them in a communication. There has to be the second side. And the big challenge, let's say for God, we put it in those terms, was to prepare the human mind for the revelation of all the mysteries, that there's one God. There, Abraham is a major milestone, but it wasn't all finished with Abraham. It took a long time to consolidate the faith in the one true God. A long time, and it's still a struggle for us because we love to worship false gods as much as we say that we don't. We give our allegiance to so many things that cannot give us happiness, that cannot give us life, that are definitely not the source of the universe, and yet we give them allegiance. We tie ourselves to them, we enslave ourselves to them. Ways of thinking, ideologies, goals in life, behaviors. That's really amazing, you know. Well, anyway, so we have that struggle for monotheism, but then we have a struggle for the faith in the Trinity. And that's another one that comes in after all the revelation of Christ. But there's an amazing little window today of light into the mystery of the resurrection. And we know a little bit about its history also from the New Testament arguments. Hey people, I want to show you a little detail I just saw. And you've seen it many times before, but I'm really amazed and intrigued because look at, you have this, let's say call this a barren winter landscape. You know, this is normally filled with vegetation. You know, we've come through here with very high plants all over the place. But look down here, these guys are still in flower. Can you believe it? These tiny, tiny, tiny little plants are still in flower. Isn't that amazing? And we're just past the middle of November. And everything else has disappeared in their great vigor. And now we have these little plants blooming. And that's a little bit also the story of the reading today. We have these individuals who are at the bottom of the pile. Terrible suffering, terrible thorns, terrible pain. And yet they're the bearers for us, a witness of the emerging faith in the resurrection. Because God is preparing his people. It's amazing, you know, how I often ask a question when groups come in, Christians and Jewish people, what kind of literature is the New Testament? And it's a question that stumps a lot of people and gets some very, very good answers. For example, one is it's religious literature. Of course it is. You know, a number of Jewish people say it's it's like Tanakh literature, which is very interesting, which understands that it's in continuity with all the the Old Testament. It's a way of saying it. Tanakh is the Hebrew word for all of the Old Testament together. The Torah, the first 5 books attributed to Moses, the Torah and the prophets and the writings. So it's true, that's where it fits. But the New Testament is also, for many people, very surprisingly, thoroughly Jewish literature, written by Jewish authors. Its origin is all Jewish. Its original audience is all Jewish. Its content is all about Jewish tradition. And its mentality is very Jewish. So you can't call that Irish literature or Russian literature or Afro-American literature or South American literature. That's Jewish literature, period. And it's important to see that to really get to understand it well. And here we see this theme of the resurrection. You know, it's a huge theme for the New Testament. And we see it already very clearly mentioned, but still a little bit out of reach of the regular under the full understanding, and yet it's very strong. And the reason why it's incredibly strong is amazing. It just was a light for me this morning, listening on that podcast. That you can also have an audio podcast to hear the readings each day, and that's easier when you wake up in the morning to get your mind focused on them. So, yes, we're here, lady. So, the resurrection. So, why does this mother of 7 boys who will be executed in a spate of religious persecution, horrible spate of religious persecution, how does she stand? How is she upheld? How is she such a heroine, such an incredibly strong person in the face of this ordeal? And it's her faith in the resurrection. And it's interesting to follow the logic, because we're talking about, let's say the story is set in the 2nd century before Christ. And she obviously does have elements from the Psalms, like you could see the responsorial today, you know, I will, when your glory is revealed, my joy will be complete when your glory is revealed. And for us, it's very easy to say, okay, that's the resurrection. But at that point, maybe it's understood in a different way, like it's a big intervention of God and he comes and he wipes out all the Romans or all the Greeks and all the enemies. It could have different paths of understanding. And for us, it's clearly resurrection. But that psalm is put in there today also for that reason, because it's clearly resurrection faith from our perspective, with Christ risen from the dead. And the type of resurrection Christ had was very different than the type of resurrection Lazarus had, or the widow's son in name, or the daughter of Jairus. They came back to the normal human life, whereas Christ rose to a whole different level, and that's the resurrection we're geared to receive by grace and fidelity to Christ. So the solid logic that sustains this woman in her faith, if we can talk in those terms, is her contemplation of God, the author of all life. And she looks at all the plants and looks at the stars and looks at the cosmos and looks at the biology that maybe she doesn't have biological scientific terms for, but she knows life. She has given birth to 7 sons. And she said, I didn't make you. You know, this incredible realistic understanding when parents have their little baby in their hands and the first 5 minutes or first half hour, first hour, the grandparents get to hold that baby. I didn't make you. There's a gift of life here that goes way beyond what we can assemble in a most advanced scientific lab with all the elements of, and this plant here, and try and make it a live plant, you know, we're still way from that point. So the gift of life, and then she recognizes the author of life, and she also recognizes another feature of God, which is his ultimate, intimate, transcendent, victorious justice. And putting these things together, these help to sustain this growing faith, because we have had the reading from Ezekiel 37, the dry bones, and they'll come back to life. But this wasn't interpreted still in terms of personal resurrection. For us, it's easy to look at it that way after 2,000 years of religious consideration of the resurrection. So it's fascinating in this sense also, and we can see why the church, the early church, understood this book in the canon, because it's preparing for the fullness of revelation about the ultimate destiny of mankind. A revelation from on high, but it's growing, it's coming like spring water out of the ground, it's seeping up through a broken, tortured humanity, persecuted religiously, and knowing that God won't abandon me because I want to be faithful to my Creator God who created me. And I'm not going to disappear into the dirt like a plant, never to come back. And then we have the amazing parable of the talents. In a certain sense, it's tied into all of this because, you know, one of the lines there, which is kind of hidden in the opening lines of the gospel reading today, is that they're talking about the coming of the kingdom. When is the kingdom coming? And Jesus shifts the conversation to not being worried about the signs of the kingdom coming, that the kingdom is coming, but do your part, which is to develop your talents, the gifts you've received. Do your part. You do your part. And don't get hung up on all these discussions. I mean, we can have them, but they shouldn't endanger our spiritual peace. You know, the people that are waiting for Jesus to come tomorrow. The second, the signs of the politics. There's now a new ruler. There's now a new change in the economy. There's now a new pandemic. And it's like signs of the end of the world. You know, Jesus says, calm down. Don't be wasting your energy on nervous, energy-consuming conversations that deplete your energy for the big subject of your responsibility for your talents before God, your opportunity to do good, to go out and develop the talents God has given you, and to put them to work for the service and love of others. And there's an extraordinary, wonderful message. And so we do our part, and like this mother in the worst of times, from a human perspective, where her children are being slaughtered through intense religious persecution, which is actually has not abandoned our world. There are people who are willing to persecute intensely. And it's a long way to reach a point to get that fixed in our world. There's a lot of homework to do. Hey guys, I just came to a spot that I have to show you, even though it's going over time a bit. But look here. Look at these plants. You remember the ones that had the beautiful flowers that were climbing up the whole way up the plant, and they were considered to be harbingers of autumn after an intense hot summer? Well, here they are now, and they seem to have their full fruit and their seed, which is ready to be scattered and ready to be blown to the wind so it can find a place to germinate. Wow, that's me. I'll use that as my goodbye moment, but I want to go back and open up the screen, zoom in a little bit so you can see all the seeds in here. The richness of nature, the abundance of nature, the abundance of life, the incredible gift God has given us. Look at, there's more of them here. And the author of life has created us to live with him forever and ever and ever in glory. When your glory is revealed, my joy will be full. And there it's about to be revealed. God bless you. See you later, alligators.